There are loves that are fleeting, and then there are loves that are everlasting, burning so brightly that they transcend time, space, and even the boundaries of life itself. The love story of Margaret and Josh is one such tale, a story of devotion that weaves through the past and the future like a delicate thread, binding them together in ways neither of them fully understood until the very end. Margaret had always been the kind of person who believed in the quiet power of love. She wasn't someone who spoke loudly about it, nor did she wear her heart on her sleeve. Instead, she showed it in small, meaningful ways, through the kindness in her eyes, the way she gently touched a loved one's arm when they spoke, or the way she stayed up late at night just to listen to the thoughts and worries of the people she cared for. Margaret had always been content with these quiet acts of love, never expecting grand gestures or loud declarations. But when she met Josh, something within her shifted. Josh was different from anyone she had ever met. He was full of energy, his laughter so contagious that it was impossible not to be swept up in it. His eyes held a depth that Margaret had never seen before, a depth that reflected both light and shadow. Josh wore his heart openly, and it was impossible not to notice the way he seemed to light up any room he entered. He had an undeniable charm, a warmth that made people feel like they were the most important person in the world. But beneath that charm, there was a sadness, a quiet sorrow that Margaret couldn't ignore. It was the kind of sadness that seemed to hang over him like a shadow, though he never spoke of it. It was on a rainy day in early spring that Margaret and Josh first crossed paths. They had both taken refuge from the storm under the awning of a small cafe at the edge of town. Margaret had been on her way to meet a friend, and Josh had been walking through the streets, lost in his thoughts. The rain had come down suddenly, and without warning, the sky had darkened, flooding the streets with water. They both found themselves standing side by side, looking out at the storm. Neither said anything at first, but there was something in the air, something electric, that made the silence between them feel comfortable rather than awkward. After a few moments, Josh turned to her with a half smile, his eyes twinkling despite the gray sky above them. "It's funny," he said, his voice light and easy. "I always forget how much I love the rain. It has a way of making everything feel alive." Margaret looked at him, surprised by his words. She had always loved the rain too, but she had never thought of it as a way of making things feel alive. For her, the rain had always been a symbol of sadness, a reminder of the things she had lost. But something in the way Josh said it made her reconsider. "Yeah," she replied softly. "It's like the world is washing away all the old stuff, making room for something new." Josh nodded, his gaze turning distant for a moment. "Exactly," he said quietly, as though the rain had stirred something deep inside him. "Sometimes, you just need to let go of the old to make space for what's to come." That moment, simple and unremarkable as it seemed, would become the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted. The days that followed were filled with conversations, long talks under the stars, quiet walks through the park, and hours spent in the cafe where they had first met. Margaret found herself drawn to Josh in a way she hadn't experienced before. There was a tenderness to his touch, a depth to his words that seemed to resonate with her on a level she couldn't explain. It was as if he understood her without needing her to explain herself, as if he could see the parts of her that she had kept hidden for so long. In turn, Josh found solace in Margaret's presence. She was patient with him in ways that no one else had ever been. She never pushed him to talk about the pain that lingered in his heart, but she was always there when he needed her. It wasn't long before they became inseparable, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. Yet, despite the joy that their love brought them, there was always an underlying sadness in Josh's eyes, a sorrow that never quite disappeared. Margaret could sense it, even if he never spoke of it. She knew that there was something in his past that haunted him, something he had never fully come to terms with. And as much as she wanted to help him, she knew that some wounds ran too deep to be healed by anyone but the person who had been hurt. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, casting a warm, golden glow across the sky, Josh finally spoke of his pain. They were sitting together on the porch of Margaret's house, the cool evening breeze rustling the leaves of the trees around them. Josh had been quiet for a long time, staring out at the horizon with a faraway look in his eyes. "Margaret," he said, his voice breaking the silence, "I need to tell you something. Something that's been with me for as long as I can remember." Margaret turned to him, her heart beating faster at the serious tone in his voice. I'm not like you, he continued, his gaze intense. I can't always move on. There are things that have happened in my life, things that I've done, that I can't take back. And I don't want you to feel like you have to carry that weight with me. Margaret reached out and took his hand in hers, squeezing it gently. She didn't need him to explain everything, she could see the pain in his eyes. She could feel it in the way he held himself, like he was carrying a burden too heavy for one person to bear. Josh, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. I don't want you to carry it alone anymore. You don't have to. I'm here. I always will be. But Josh only shook his head, a tear escaping from the corner of his eye. It's not that simple, he said quietly. Some things can't be fixed. No matter how much we want them to be. The silence between them stretched on, thick and heavy, as Margaret held his hand, offering him the comfort of her presence. She didn't have the words to make things better. She couldn't erase the pain that Josh had carried for so long, but she could be there for him, just as she always had been. And in that moment, Margaret realized something. Love wasn't always about fixing things. It wasn't about making everything perfect. Sometimes, love was about standing beside someone in their pain, offering them the solace of a hand to hold and a heart that understood. The months that followed were marked by moments of joy and sorrow, as love often is. There were days when the world seemed to fall away, leaving just the two of them, and other days when the weight of the past threatened to pull them apart. But through it all, Margaret and Josh remained bound by something deeper than love itself. A shared understanding of each other's struggles, a mutual respect for the sacrifices they both made. And then, one day, the inevitable happened. Josh left. He didn't tell Margaret he was leaving, not in the way one might expect. He simply disappeared, as though he had never been there at all. Margaret woke up one morning to find that his side of the bed was empty, his belongings gone, and a single note left on the pillow. I'm sorry, it read. I need to find my way on my own. For a long time, Margaret didn't know how to process his departure. She searched for him, but he was gone. No one knew where he had gone, or if he was even still alive. And yet, as the years passed, Margaret never stopped loving him. The flame that had burned so brightly between them never extinguished. She carried it with her, a quiet fire that burned in her heart. Even as time went on, and Margaret grew older, she never forgot Josh. There were moments, when the rain fell softly, when the sun dipped below the horizon, that she could still feel his presence beside her. His laugh echoed in her mind, and she could almost hear his voice whispering her name. And then, one day, many years later, she found herself sitting on the same porch where they had once sat together. The evening was quiet, the air cool and still. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, it was as if time had stopped. In the distance, she heard footsteps, soft, hesitant, but unmistakable. She opened her eyes, and there he was. Josh. Older now, his face etched with the lines of time, but still unmistakably the man she had loved so many years ago. Their eyes met, and in that instant, it was as though the years had never passed. The flame that had burned between them had never died. It had simply waited, quietly, patiently, until they were ready to embrace it once more. Without a word, Josh walked toward her, and as he did, Margaret stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. When he reached her, he took her hands in his, and for the first time in so many years, they were truly together. I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I was wrong to leave you. Margaret smiled, her tears falling freely now. No, she said softly, her voice trembling. You were never wrong. We were always meant to be. And so, after all the pain, all the years apart, they embraced, knowing that their love, though marked by sacrifice and sorrow, would always burn brightly. It had transcended time, and in the end, it was all that mattered.